Perfect Turd Podcast, episode 55. Lamar, we did something different this week. We watched a silent film made in 1938, unreleased for over 80 years. So it has an interesting story, interesting backstory, and to help us out, decode all of this, the history of this film, Ed Hartman. He's the producer and the composer behind the official release of this film. Thanks for joining us. How's it going?
Welcome, sir.
You bet. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be on the Perfect Turd Podcast.
Everybody is. It's a great name. You know, it's two things in one. We'll just say that's what it is. Yes.
And I'm on my magic screen here, so I can kind of.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
Good B-movie trick.
Yes,
for sure.
So with this film, give us just a rundown of what the film is, because it was made, of course, by Richard Lyford, and then it was unreleased. What is the backstory, I guess, to this film?
This thing depends on how far back you want to go. So, I mean, Richard Lyford was born in 1917, right as World War II was happening. And anyway, and then he made a bunch of movies in Seattle until 1920, and then he went and worked for Disney and all sorts of other stuff. We'll get into that later. And if you flash forward to, I don't know, the 1980s or 90s, there's a company in Seattle not far from me called Something Weird. I'll bet you guys know this because it's a exploitation film distribution company. You should know it. And there was a guy who founded it, and him and his wife, and he passed away. His wife still runs it, but they had created I think it was probably originally a videotape, VHS. Monsters Crash the Pajama Party.
Okay.
And in it were a couple of weird scenes that nobody knew what they were. They were little horror movie silent scenes with some really iffy music underneath, but you know, what the hell. And if you can even find them on this DVD, because they're hidden everywhere, it takes about a week just to figure out where anything is. Anyway, so that's what happened. And then you flash up to about 2000, God, I'm losing my dates here, 2013, and there's a thing called the Classic Horror Film Board. And a couple of guys on there were looking at these scenes and go, who the heck is this guy? And I'm not just talking about who directed it, but there's some people in it that looked kind of interesting. And the director acts in this movie. In fact, he's this guy.
Okay,
right?
Cool.
That's Richard Lyford in that era, in his 20s. And anyway, so they started to write about this for a couple of years, and they were digging. Man, it was incredible detective work. And they discovered a ton of stuff about this guy. And then it got really kind of cool. And then a couple of years later, they contacted the great niece of Richard Lyford in Seattle, because that's where he grew up. So his family, some of his family, still kind of here. And anyway, and then how I got and she confirmed all this stuff. She got a hold of Richard's son, who's still alive. And they got involved in the film estate. And then she wound up with a bunch of 60 millimeter movies of his stuff to protect it for the future. And then if my thing is, besides scoring movies for whatever, I ran a drum shop for only 25 years in Seattle called the Drum Exchange. And I was teaching music in the back of that store for years. And I had a student in there, and his mother was this person. So he graduates. She starts coming to see me for percussion lessons, wants to learn some hand drums. And at one point, I'm showing her what I'm doing, because she understands I'm scoring films and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I show her a track I had put against a Buster Keaton silent movie just for fun. It's on YouTube, called Can't Stop, Gonna Drop, and it's kind of a Danny Elfman style thing. She saw it, and she looked at me and says, "You wouldn't want to score a weird silent movie for me, would you?" And I said, "Sure I would." And that's what happened. So it kind of came through this crazy serendipitous pathway to me. Since then, the film has been in many festivals and won many awards. And I mean many awards. I have one for show and tell here. The Jean-Luc Godard Cult Critic Award, but I have nice trophies and things. And I've won a number of, I think it's like 34 Best Score Awards nominations. And over the years, she's kind of supported this film, and I became producer. I kind of got drafted, and I learned all about Film Freeway and how to submit to festivals, and that's how we got in all these festivals. Went to a number of them, including a bunch in L.A., and it just kept moving forward. In the last year or so, she made a grand gesture and gave me the film estate and the LLC that's been taking this. So I've kind of grown into ownership on this, which is why I can do a lot more with it. So the film is now in distribution. It's on Amazon Prime. It's on Google Play, YouTube Movies, and even TubiTV.
Yeah, we saw it on there too.
And it's going to be, and the amazing thing, and we're still waiting for a date. They haven't quite programmed it. We thought it was going to be in the fall, but they're trying to find the right, theme for it. It's going to be on Turner Classic Movies this year. Cool. And that's crazy. And I hope to do a live on air with them on that. So all through this, I've been promoting the heck out of this thing, contacting you guys, blogs. We've had a lot of reviews, a lot of write-ups, a lot of interviews over it. It's been tremendous for me as a film scoring person. And then I've also been developing a documentary about him, and that's almost done. I'm waiting on some more clearances, just one more left. And I'm actually writing his story, the first 20 years, and trying to develop that into a potential biopic film. Because it would be really outrageous to see what he's done. Because I got all these backstories of what he did in Seattle and beyond. I mean, maybe it'll be a mini-series, and this will be like the first Queen's Gambit show. I don't know. But anyway, season 1.
Was there a reason why the film wasn't released initially? Like, he made it, he was 20 years old, and then it went unreleased. Was there a reason why?
The reason why it was never released is as soon as he made this film, his 9th film by the time he was 20, just let that soak in, 9 movies. And these were not long films, but, some of them, this film may have been longer. This seems to be his cut, and we have reason to believe that. Is that immediately upon finishing this, he had won a number of awards in Seattle through these amateur contests. MGM, he was placed in a thing, which made him some money. And these were all done with family and friends. There was no independent film movement at this time.
Right.
There was no filmmaking in Seattle. There, maybe one or two other people in the Northwest were even experimenting with it at this time. But he went to L.A., and Disney, after seeing some of his work and knowing he experimented with sound with 60-millimeter film, which hadn't really been done much, he invited him to work for him. So at that point, he's working for Disney on Fantasia, Pinocchio, and Dumbo, doing special effects and blowing things up for modeling and stuff like that. So when he got there was really no use. He would have had no way to distribute it from Seattle anyway. There was really no pathway to do that, especially a 60-millimeter film. He kind of showed it in a few schools and things like that, kind of like what I'm doing these days. I think there's some fascinating stuff there. But he wrote about this film. If you look up American cinematographer, you will actually find some of his write-ups about how he made this thing. And again, he was officially an amateur cinematographer, a filmmaker. And so this was his thesis project. He went to the University of Washington for a year or two, but it wasn't about film. There was no film school anywhere. You want to make a movie, you figured it out, or you went to Hollywood and, worked your way up until you figured it out. Or probably were an actor, like Buster Keaton, and then figured out the filmmaking side. So that's why it couldn't have been released. Also, there's there's another wonderful piece of proof here, is that actually 2 pieces of proof, that when he made this movie, there's another movie from 1934 called As the Earth Turns. That was made by Warner Brothers or something.
Yep.
He couldn't have released it with this name anyway.
Okay, yeah.
And it has this incredible animation, title sequence. That's one reason people come to me and say, I wasn't made then. Nobody knew how to do that. Yeah, he did it on his own. He's got he's blending. He's doing, double, triple exposures, and it's like Ray Harryhausen. He probably knew him. And then also, this film was very loosely based on a 1915 novel, The Man Who Rocked the Earth, which we really didn't discover until we started. Kind of freaked us out. But that's public domain now, but it wasn't then.
Right.
So there again, those are interesting proofs that say, well, no, he couldn't have done that at that time. So that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. But
and so that's an interesting thing about the movie that is based off of a book, but this movie has a lot of sci-fi themes. Were a lot of his other earlier themes like sci-fi, or was this just a movie that he was inspired to do science fiction?
Well, this movie was done on a bet.
Really?
Yeah. He had another, and there were some other major films that he wanted to do, and this was a big one, and he didn't think he was going to be able to do it, so his order kind of got shifted. He had done a number of horror films, and we have two fragments, one The Scalpel and the other one Ritual of the Dead, which were in this DVD. But when I got to know Something Weird Video, it took me about 6 months to make a connection. And as it turned out, I had to drive about 2 miles to their office, which is crazy. If you really put this whole thing together, that somebody in L.A. saw it on here, and the film, this is the film of Ritual of the Dead and The Scalpel. And the guy who I forgot the man who ran this, was very, very careful. And he had no idea what this was. We still don't know how he got a hold of it. So we digitized it. And these are phenomenal little short films. Ritual of the Dead is kind of a mummy film. And the scene is rather gruesome. I mean, the quote that he has in his notes about it was, there's a scene where you're talking, let's kill somebody with a sledgehammer or whatever, and they don't show anything. You see them, anyway, and there were I forgot to mention, Lyford had created a 50-seat theater in his house basement. Oh my God, right? And we know that house. In fact, I've gotten to know the new owners, and some of that was still around, but I think it got tossed. But anyway, so there, and again, he did some interesting experiments with sound and stuff. But there were stories of people screaming and going, "I can't believe you're crazy," and it was like an axe. We're talking serious horror there. And then the other one is The Scalpel, which is kind of a Jekyll and Hyde scene that has a tremendous transformation scene that took about 6 hours of makeup and transformation to create. So I think horror, and to this day, horror is still the go-to genre for people that are doing. I don't know why that is. It's maybe a little, it's easier than comedy, I think. I think comedy's got to be the hardest thing to pull off. I've been involved in comedy films, and man, they are tough. If you don't hit it right on, it's, but horror films you can be kind of silly about, and people still seem to get into them. I mean, the 50s proved that. Jeez, Mystery Science Theater proved that. Still entertaining.
We see a lot of them on our show.
Yes. You're making a whole thing on this. I mean, a lousy horror movie is still fun to watch.
It's still fun, yeah. So the process, when you came on initially before you were a producer, you just came on as a composer. Yeah. How long did you work on it? Because you mentioned it was shorter at one time, and then it...
Well, yeah.
So what was your whole process with that?
Originally, it was about a half hour. And then about halfway through my scoring a couple of weeks in, we had no deadline at that time. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was kind of really done as an archive for the family.
Okay.
And I've gotten to know the family really well. And they were really good friends. We wound up creating a new deadline of about a month from the time I started, because we wanted to start. It was coming out pretty good, and my co-producer, the family person, was maybe we should put him in some festivals. Well, there was no thought of any of that when we started this. This was simply, she had digitized this stuff locally and thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun to add some music to it? And then from there, it started to roll a little bit, and she discovered Film Freeway, and then I learned it and got involved. And before you knew it, the Seattle International Film Festival, was starting to accept, and we thought, well, what the heck? How can they resist this homemade movie? So halfway into it, I discovered some more scenes. We're going through the digitized assets that we'd been doing of all sorts of films that he had participated in or directed but didn't necessarily own. And in some of the B-reels, there was these other scenes. And I thought, man, because I had noticed some weird skips in the movie where I'm thinking, is it just me or am I missing part of the plot here? Anyway, and I actually was able to piece it together, and we had local companies involved in re-editing it. And when you find out the movie is wrong when you're starting to score it, that doesn't make me feel good because I have to rescore a lot of it. Yeah. It really screws stuff up pretty good. But it was all right. I figured it out. And then it was about a month before we did that. And then we submitted it to the Seattle Film Festival, which eventually took it and did an incredible job of showing it in 2000. Luckily, we did this in 2019. Yeah. Because if it had been this year, we were screwed. I mean, we had a lot of virtual screenings, but this movie is a theater movie. I mean, it's all right. I'm really grateful it's on TV and people have good speakers these days, and you want to play it with good headphones or speakers because it's silent. The music is the dialogue. You miss that, it sucks, So, but they did it at a 1915 theater in Seattle, the Egyptian, that's run by the film festival, and we had a line around the block. I mean, it was incredible, and they really supported it. We had reviews and people, from the press there. I walked the red carpet with Mark Maron and Lynn Shelton, who's a local celebrity that just passed away, great film director. So that's been an experience. And that really brought the film out to this day. And how, I've been involved as a composer in organizations for years, and how my connections through that are what connected me to festivals like this too. So, if there's a learning tool for any composers that are watching this, is that the more you participate in organizations and support the community, it comes back to get you. And I can draw a line between my role on the Seattle Composers Alliance Board of Directors, which is a great local organization, and the screening at the Egyptian by the Seattle Film Festival on how that happened. So, again, I think for me, the learning tool of this project has by far helped my career more than even monetary support on this, which has been considerable. I can appreciate that. But it has taught me so much, not only about scoring, but about how you get successful at what you're going to do. And people become interested in you. And again, you want to just keep throwing stuff out to others, and then they'll do it.
I love the score, man. And I'm a film composer myself, and I know how to do 45 minutes wall-to-wall music is a lot. For people that, it's a lot, everybody. So, great job.
That's equivalent
great
to
job.
A 45-minute silent film is equivalent to a major 80-minute feature.
Yeah.
You have features that have 20 minutes of music
for sure.
less.
Yeah.
So there is no, and you know what's I learned about this that's even more interesting, is that when you were writing scores for analog film, for film stock, and you play it, you have the ticking of the projector. Even in a theater, you heard that, or the hiss of the soundtrack. So if there's a silence, you're still kind of in that watching a movie mode. Yeah. But when you're working digitally, it is dead silent. Now, on movies, they had all sorts of ambient sounds, so we really never achieved dead silence in films unless it's on purpose, and it's jarring. I mean, you watch a movie that hasn't, it's supposed to be in real life, and then all of a sudden there's literally nothing. You feel like everybody's gone deaf. So in a silent movie on digital format, when my music stops, I couldn't let it stop very long, or you would get very uncomfortable. You'd think, is there something wrong with this? Is the sound out?
Or ambient sound or anything like that.
Anything.
You had to back it up.
And the other thing I did deliberately is I did not create any sound effects using anything except for musical instruments. So, crashes and cymbals and bass drums were, they could have been earthquakes and stuff like that. And I wanted that for kind of artistic value. Now, Richard Lyford, in his 50-seat theater where his friends came in and watched these movies, we're going to have a bigger show. It was just like, Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. Let's have a show. That's what they were doing. They were selling, nickel tickets and stuff. Anyway, but they had a room in the back where they were doing sound effects. I'm a percussionist, right? So I got all sorts of, I can do that all night. But I really didn't do that. There's only maybe 1 or 2 points where I tried to synchronize some knocking with a woodblock against somebody hammering something, but I didn't want to get into trying to create a sound film. I wanted to make it, and I think what's always amazing about silent movies is that you really don't miss the dialogue ever. A good one anyway. It's not like they go, and they're reciting the words, and then he has the titles, the intertitles.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they do a great job of that, so you get it. But when you really watch it, there's never that many of the intertitles. There's just enough to tell the story. So I never felt like I was missing a whole lot of the plot, except for when actually part of the film wasn't there. But I think the music then has a whole nother level of support it has to create, and that's where it gets hairy. Because you have to make a lot of decisions on themes and how you want to make things work. And I kind of barreled into this thing because, again, originally I didn't know where it was going. So I created, I got my keyboard right here. For whatever reason, I sat down at the piano one day and went. That was about it. And I don't know why, but that kind of became the major theme that kind of comes back and forth through the film on there, especially this last, and it's this kind of, what in the heck is that? It's not resolved. So, that's it.
Yeah, one cool thing about this, like for people out there that are skeptical about watching silent films or whatever, what's great about this movie is like it was forward thinking. And the message of the film applies today in many ways. Everyone needs to go see it for themselves. I won't give it away. But he was definitely a forward-thinking individual. So,
yeah,
which is
well,
great.
Again, it's loosely based on a story, but he put it in you couldn't have. That book couldn't have been made into it was like trying to film an Isaac Asimov story, and wouldn't have worked. To this day, that's but as opposed to Ray Bradbury or something like that. But what he did is he has kind of newspaper reporters and the whole bit, and there are so many funny foreshadowing things in there. You basically have this character Pax, who means peace in Latin, and he's kind of straight out of In Like Flint, Austin Powers, Dr. No. He's way ahead of his time. And there's a backstory, and that was what the missing footage was. The backstory going back to World War whatever in that time. And imagine watching that movie without that backstory. You completely miss the whole thing. And, you think about like Cobra Kai, which I'm a huge fan. Now we see the backstory of all the other characters now. So you don't always see that when you have kind of a crazy person in a movie. But that develops this interesting sympathy. You start going,
it does.
Well, I can see why that happened, and you forget about the millions of people he probably just killed. But, it's all right. But then there's these funny little, and I say dialogue, these are intratitles, but, like, I'm a scientist, not a butcher. Doctor.
Yeah.
And, it's just hilarious, these little quips. So there's Star Trek stuff in there. I don't know. That's why I think it resonates really well these days. You watch it with that, and you really it has an interesting ending. And I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to tell you what happens. Right. But he does something technically with the film, which is really unique at that time, and we weren't quite sure whether he was doing what we thought he were doing or something else. And I actually rechecked the film footage itself and discovered, no, that's what it is. I knew it, but anyway, it's something to watch. And it's startling. I mean, a lot of people would say, well, why didn't he do that? But man, he did, whether it was out of budget or it was simply he had a deliberate concept going, I really don't know on that. So when you watch the movie, just watch the ending time period there and watch what happens. You'll notice something about it.
Okay.
And it might remind you of another film of that era in 1939.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, Toto too.
Yeah.
So, as much as I'm saying.
Yeah, because
people hear it, they miss it.
It really, like, when I'm watching a movie like this, you got to remember, like, he is an independent filmmaker. And then when I'm watching this and he's doing, like, things with, like, special effects and everything like that he's doing, I'm thinking, man, Independence Day, you can think of any, like, big budget blockbuster that you can think of. But he had, like, in his vision, even though he had a small budget, he had the scope of it still.
He had no budget. He had zero budget. I mean, he was doing making signage and for local businesses and stuff like that. That's how he raised cash. And he had a printing press he had somehow picked up and was doing flyers for people and stuff. And then photography. And he understood graphics and that, and he probably would have gone into that if he hadn't done this. But no, I agree. His understanding of special effects are outrageously good. It just, again, this title sequence alone is frightening, and his understanding of makeup in this movie, especially the other films that he did. There's examples of that too. But it's not over the top makeup in this because it's science fiction. It's not monsters and stuff like that. This is normal kind of stuff. But the stories, the backstories on the production, I can give you some information about. There's a scene at Boeing Field, which is still here in just south of downtown. It's not SeaTac, the other major airport, but it's where Boeing, bases part of its business. There's another field near me up north. And in fact, we did a private screening for family and friends at the Boeing Museum of Flight, which is right next to the field where it was being filmed 80 years before, with members of the families there.
Okay.
Yeah, and they had access to. I mean, he had gotten access to actual planes. There's an interior shot. I mean, it's really well edited.
The base, yeah.
Yeah. On how that works. In fact, I've recently discovered there's a scene where he's kind of in the NAAA, which is kind of like where the messages come in and all that. And we thought it was another place. But about a block from his house in Seattle was a guy who had kind of a little radio station going for years until 10 years before it was shut down from bootlegging. And they caught this guy in that room bootlegging. And he went to jail and stuff. It was this infamous story. Anyway, we know it's the same room because it has the same curtains and that technology that they used. They literally photographed that a block away. Oh, wow. Anyway, wow. Then there's this famous landmark called Gasworks Park in Seattle that overlooks downtown. It's just kind of north of Lake Union on the there, and it was a working gas plant, gasification. And they broke in there. They did. First of all, there was no film permits, and I don't think the city would have been interested in saying, yeah, come on in, make your damn movie. These were kids. These were high school kids. And they broke in, and there's a scene of them kind of running away, and it's them running away from the security police.
Oh.
Man, that is guerrilla
yeah.
filmmaking to the max at that time.
Nice.
Yes,
That's why I think the Biopic is such a strong story. Can you imagine seeing a movie about this being made?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's just off the charts cool. So I got total respect for him. I mean, he was a bit of a wild man. And,
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah. And then you know, the story goes. So he goes to Disney, who was interested because of his experiments in special effects and all the rest of that stuff. And he's blowing stuff on the lot. And the best story I know that's going to be in the biopic of it with an interview is he has to do a model probably for Fantasia where they have the sequence of the volcano. And so what Lyford did was created physical models for the artists to work from. And so he was great with dynamite. You'll see it in the movie a lot. And he blew up a hell of an explosion on the Disney lot in Buena Vista or whatever that is. And at that particular moment, he didn't tell anybody about it, evidently. And all the artists on the lot were in the midst of their scenes, drawing their animation cells, and they went, "Yit!" And so immediately after this was done, Mr. Disney said, "Richard, what in the hell were you thinking?" and he said, "I want to see that film in 10 minutes or whatever." And he showed it. And Disney said, "That's very, very good, but don't ever do that again." You know? So, you know, so there's a lot of interesting things that he did in his life that were, you know, kind of like that. So he winds up from there. I mean, we can continue into a little story on here. He goes into the Army. Disney hands him his draft papers and winds up doing classified films for the OSS, which is the pre-CIA. And does things about the making of the UN. And anyway, after the war, he comes back, and he doesn't go back to Disney. He winds up going to New York. I'm not quite sure how that all occurred. He gets married. He meets his wife there. And he starts making a lot of commercial films. And he's an independent filmmaker, which he's always been. And I suspect that as much as Disney was a lot of fun, it really wasn't the place for him to do what he probably really wanted to do. But at that time, it was a studio system, and this is like 1940, 1945. You know, in fact, think about this. How many directors do you know? I'm not talking about Touchstone here, but that were working at Disney over the last 100 years that you can even name. Right. You know, what you think about Disney, you think of Walt Disney. He did everything. But he hired all these people to do this stuff. So anyway, at one point in the about 1950, he winds up working on a documentary called The Titan, the story of Michelangelo. And that film won an Academy Award for documentary in 1950. Richard Lyford directed and edited that film. That's how good of an editor he was.
Right.
And you know, that's really something. He didn't get the award because guess what? Directors don't pick up the best, you know, that award. They predict directors awards, but that's it. The producer does. One reason I'm a producer, I get the awards. So anyway, by proxy, so that he did that in 1950, and then he did some wild stuff in the Mideast, and did films. For Saudi Aramco Corporation that got involved, and one of them. I'm missing my names in my head here. Island of the Arabs was this film that came out in the 50s, and it didn't go anywhere because it was right before one of the Mideast wars. The timing wasn't very good. And then he winds up going back and working for Disney in the 60s and 70s, and he does a lot of the animal documentaries on Wonderful World of Disney. And in fact, one of them, the skunk one, I can't remember the name of that, actually was in the top 10 on ratings. And what was amazing about that, it was like number 3 or 4, something like that. It got beat by Patton, which was being premiered on television on network that night, and had one of the Patton had one of the largest viewerships ever, and this film still wound up, you know, coming in the ratings on that. I mean, not this film, that TV show he did. So again, his work was always very, very good, but a lot of it became educational films, you know, and things like that.
Cool, man. Well, to wrap it up, I just want to say, like, I'm super grateful that we were exposed to this, because this is a great, cool film. I'm telling everyone, like, this movie is still relevant today. It's not for what, you know, there's, and his work is amazing, and the score was great. And so to stay up to date for everyone, astheearthturns.com, just find out where you can see it, the updates on the DVD when that's coming out, and then check out edhartmanmusic.com to connect with Ed, and music lessons, all this. So
yeah, I'm really interested in finding, you know, more directors to work with. I have some films I'm working on right now that'll be coming out this year. So
awesome.
But I'm really looking for people to collaborate with on scoring for sure.
For sure, man.
And hopefully my projects will develop as well. And you know, I have no business doing them, but I don't care anymore. When you get a certain age in life, you just simply, you know, I just don't care.
Just relax.
Just do it anyway. What's that? What are you going to lose? You're going to be dead. You know, who cares?
Cool, man. Awesome.
Real talk.
Thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you. Very informational.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Deuces. Thank you very much.